Today's topic is probably the one that most people try not to talk about, which is what they call the problem of evil. And if you ever are talking with someone that doesn't believe in God, this is the argument they're going to use. It is the atheist hammer, I guess, is a better way of saying it. And let's just listen to a song to kind of put us in the right frame of mind, and then we will talk about it. I like that song. So when we're on the mountains, we need to remember that God's the one that put us there, and when we're in the valleys, we have to recognize that God can see us there, right? And I like that. It's a comfort and assurance that is pretty important. Let me go ahead and open with a prayer, and then we'll start our topic. Lord, thank you so much for this time today, sharing about you so that we can answer the critic's biggest question. Help us to hear your voice in what is being shared today so that we can use it when this opportunity presents itself, and it will. And I pray for those that are struggling with things today, as all of us are. Help us to see your purposes in the things that sometimes we think are purposeless. You have a purpose for everything in this world, Lord, and we need to trust you. And I pray these things in your name, Lord Jesus. Amen. All right, so a little recap. This is for Chris. He asked this the last time he was here. This is kind of where we are in our class. We're talking about the problem of evil today. Next 2 weeks, we'll be talking about can we trust the Bible, which will start getting exciting. And if you notice, it'll be the first time we actually have gone to the Bible in this series, where we was talking about how we can be confident in what God has given us. Because once we have confidence in what God has given us, then we can trust what's in there, and we can apply that to our lives. Then we'll talk about Jesus, the historical Jesus, and the proofs for the resurrection. And then we'll all get excited. The last couple of weeks we'll talk about science in the Bible, and there is so much science in the Bible. It's not a science book, but it is quite remarkable what the Bible gets right and what every other ancient text gets wrong. And that should give us a lot of encouragement. And we'll see. And I'll have to modify that a little bit. I've taken a little heat on the internet about not being very scientific, so we'll see what happens in another week. I'll have to address some of those issues. So, the problem of evil. Is evil a problem?
It is.
Yeah, it is. So our objective today is to develop a philosophical response to the atheist's best argument, which is what they call the problem of evil. So, before I get started, I want to read this because I want to make sure I get this right. What I have to say today is not going to be very comforting for some of you. It just isn't. If you're struggling with grief or suffering or disease of a loved one, these words are not necessarily going to be uplifting. And I'm not a pastor, and I'm not a counselor. I'm an engineer, so I don't have a bedside manner. And so stick with me. My words might seem sharp at times, but that's just the engineer in me. I do have compassion, I promise. But when you're talking about things like this, it's difficult, and we have to kind of remove ourselves from the circumstance so we can see what it looks like in the bigger picture. Because our suffering and other people's suffering, we have to see what it looks like from others' perspectives, and more importantly, from God's perspective, which is not very easy to do sometimes. So, the philosophical and logical approach that I'm going to present is maybe things you might not have heard, but you might have heard. It's biblical, but it doesn't always make you feel good. Believe it or not everything in the Bible will make you feel good. And our objective is to share how we can address the concerns of people that are using this as their resistance. And I would guess most of us know people that have gone through some traumatic event, and it's actually driven them away from God. And sadly, that's because someone wasn't there to come alongside them and help them get through the mud of that circumstance. And it will be uncomfortable. And there's going to be some images and some topics that I'm going to show that will make you uncomfortable. So I apologize in advance. And stick with me to the end, because I hope I will address most of the concerns before we get there. I tried to be as soft, but this is a topic that you can't be very soft about. So again, looking at our worldview picture, we've been walking through it throughout the class, and we're going to be talking about evil today. And it's probably the least favorite conversation to have. The atheist will say that there cannot possibly be a God because there is so much evil in the world. And you'll hear that over and over again. And in fact, William Rowe, let me get his credentials right. He was an atheist philosopher. He taught at the University of Purdue. He died, I think, in about 2015. And he specialized in the philosophy of religion. In fact, he taught philosophy of religion classes as an atheist. Take that in mind. Hey, at most of our seminaries in America, the people teaching these classes are not Christian. That's in seminaries. That's in seminaries. It is. That's another conversation. So, William Rowe started out as a fundamentalist Christian. And through his life, he became a very outspoken atheist. And his claim was he lacked the experiences and the evidences to believe in God. And that's a pretty strong statement from someone that's so educated and the one that's actually educating people in religion. And he formulated this argument of evil. And it's, there exists instances of intense suffering which an omnipotent, omniscient being could have prevented without thereby losing some greater good or permitting some evil equally bad or worse. And the omniscient, holy, good being would prevent the occurrence of any intense suffering it could, unless it could not do so without thereby losing some greater good or permitting some evil equally bad or worse. So, there does not exist an omnipotent, omniscient, holy, good being. That's his logical reasoning. It's so bad, and if there really was a God, then it wouldn't be so bad because he would do something about it. So there must not be a God. And that is, sadly, most Christians that become non-Christian atheists, this is their logic. This is what they're going to use when they're trying to justify their change in opinion. And he authored a book called The Friendly Atheist, as well as a bunch of other books. And like I said, he has a master's and doctorate degree in divinity. But sadly, he became disillusioned because he didn't think there was enough evidence for God. In fact, this was the one that he couldn't get over. He just said over and over again that he lacked evidence, experience for his religious conviction. So he changed his religious conviction. A very educated person. Any thoughts on that before we move forward? It's cheery. It'll be really cheery for a while, so sorry.
Like the opposite of C.S. Lewis, basically. Mm-hmm.
Pretty much, and there's a lot of them. Another one, this is I do not have this guy's picture. Dr. Nicola Salvatore is another professor of philosophy and religion. And he wrote this. This is actually his dissertation topic at a seminary, which is the defense of the skeptical theist, which really means skeptical theist is code word for atheist, right? Almost all so-called skeptical theists tend to be atheists because they're skeptical there is a God. That's what it means. So he said this: the existence of a disproportionate prima facie gratuitous evil and suffering in the world is enough evidence against the existence of an omnipotent, perfectly loving, omniscient God of classical theism. Cheery, huh? Yeah. So, what is it that the atheists are really claiming?
Well, I think they're saying that since there's evil and corruption in the world, God has done nothing, so there's no God.
Yeah, that's effectively what they are saying. If evil proves that there can't be a God, because if there was a God and he's so loving, why would there be evil? And we've all had grief and sorrow. I know I have. We have all seen loved ones die. Children, parents, siblings, accidents, diseases like cancer and war and famine. So how can a loving God allow this? And we as Christians have to reconcile this. We can't just ignore it. And too many Christians ignore this topic. Is God loving? That's what the atheists are going to challenge us with. And, some people that claim to be Christians will go shake their fists at God when bad things happen. It's like, why? How could you do this? It's this concept of, how dare God interfere with my vision of what the world's supposed to be like? So we often question God. We often blame God. The atheists question God and blame God, which I always find interesting, considering they don't believe in God. Okay, cheery start. I'm sorry, but we are talking about evil after all, and you do kind of have to set the mode and the mood. Bad things hurt. I know they hurt me. I hurt, you hurt, our families hurt. What does that say about God, the God that we claim to believe? Any thoughts? I won't make you say anything. We'll get to
There's opportunities for growth and trouble for him.
Amen.
That's right.
That's a great answer, Laura.
The times I've gotten closest to God is when you're hurting trouble. Yeah.
So, we've talked about a lot of evidence for God in the previous sessions. Overwhelming evidence, frankly. This is only one evidence that the atheists use against us, and it's not like it's trumps everything else we've talked about. But it is one that we actually have to reconcile. So, what exactly is evil? Can you guys give me an example of something you consider to be evil?
Sex trafficking.
Okay. Sex trafficking. We got that in church this morning, right? What else? War. Sickness.
I'll go for the more pedestrian. Selfishness.
Selfishness. Very interesting.
Demonic beings are evil.
The spiritual, right?
Like
put that.
demons or whatever.
We'll go to demons. Okay. What else?
Lack of peace.
What kind of peace are we talking about? That word can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. Yeah, inner peace or outer peace? Peace between people or peace inside our head? Yeah, just put war. That's just conflict, right?
Absence of good.
Love of money.
Absence.
Corruption.
You guys are. What was the other one? Oh, love of money. Yeah, love of money. Murder. Well, I've been putting it on different sides for a reason, and we'll get to that in a minute. So, there's a. Yeah. Gluttony would be one of those I'm guilty of.
That's good cooking.
Yeah, well, yes. You got to be polite, right? Okay, so there's a lot of things that we experience in our lives that we consider to be evil. But does that define what evil is? Whoops.
Not necessarily.
You mean express
You guys are already getting ahead of me. Well, what do you like about my display today? What do you see in front of you today?
I see a 120 millimeter round with riflings in it, so it's been fired.
Do you know how old this is?
I think that is very old.
It's World War II, Pacific. Well, I only know that because that came from his brother who served in the Pacific. So, is that evil?
Depends on how it's used. As a display itself.
Well, it's really pretty, right?
It could be a sign of peace.
Could be a sign of peace. Okay. What about this one? What is it? Do you guys know what this is?
No.
It's actually the same thing.
Yeah.
Except this one's from World War One. But it's been turned into something quite beautiful.
That's pretty neat, actually.
This is French, right? From the First World War. So something that could be used for extreme evil can actually be used for good. So,
Just like a fire.
Fire.
Yeah,
You confront everything.
a perfect example.
the point is, we perceive things as evil, and I think we over-define things as evil, frankly, and we'll talk about that a little more. The thing, or the activity, or the action are not always evil. It's what we do with it that can, what humans do. And something that could do extreme evil can be changed into something quite beautiful and I don't know if it's useful or not. It's a vase, but it could be useful. So I promised Tom I'd use our artillery shells today if he would come. Then he didn't come, so you can tell him I did it. So what is evil? Okay, so we need to come up with a way to define what evil is, and this is a very complicated question. As we see from the whiteboard, there's a lot of things in our life that we perceive as evil. So we have to ask a couple questions about things. Does evil disprove God? We have to reconcile this and be comfortable with this. We have to determine if there is a purpose for evil in our world. And then what is the remedy for the evil that we see in the world? You probably know where the last one is going. Any questions?
Well,
You guys are really quiet.
God gave us a free will, so
Yeah,
that goes back to the choice. What do you do with
it does.
Well,
Let's address the.
When you put it like that, the first thing that I thought about was Judas. God created Judas even knowing what he was going to do and the reason he was going to do it. And he had a purpose for it, and the remedy was because he had to go through it to show who Jesus was, and he had to suffer for it, as so.
yeah, I actually believe, Judas made his choice. And if he had chose properly, God would have found another avenue to have his plan fulfilled. But it is, there was a purpose in that evil. Even though it was extreme evil, what happened to Jesus, obviously. Well, let's just talk about the first one. And I want to introduce you again to Richard Dawkins. You guys know who Richard Dawkins is? He's probably one of the most famous atheists. He's a biology professor at Oxford University. He's debated John Lennox a lot. He's part of the new atheists who've kind of gone away now, but he was one of the more outspoken of the new atheists when they first.
When they're a professor at a college, are they allowed to teach their atheism in college?
Oh gosh, yeah. Every college professor teaches atheism. You can't teach Christianity, but every college professor teaches atheism pretty much. There's very few exceptions today.
You get in trouble if you put in your theist background in there.
But he wrote a book called The God Delusion. Anybody familiar with this book? Chris, did you read it?
I haven't read it, but I've heard much a lot.
So I'm going to give you a disclaimer again before I show you the quote. There's some very strong language in his quote, which are fighting words for a Christian. At least I have that response. So just be aware. So this is what he said in The God Delusion. He said, "The God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all of fiction, jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist," and all these words are starting to make my tongue twist. "If infanticidal, genocidal," I don't know what that one is. I mean, you get the point. "Malevolent bully." That's how Richard Dawkins described God.
Capricious. Lord's gonna get you, dude.
Oh, this book sold
He made a lot
tens
of
of millions of copies.
money. Made a lot of
Okay, tens of millions of copies. He's written other books. This one is one of his quotes from the book The River Out of Eden, Darwin's Life View. So, in a universe of electrons and selfish genes, blind physical forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt and other people are going to get lucky. And you won't find any rhyme or reason to it, nor any justice. The universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at the bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference.
Apparently he's not indifferent.
Well, you're getting ahead of me, Connie. Go ahead.
Sorry, so I do have one question on this one that I think cuts across both believers and non-believers, is should we expect justice in our world? And I would say with a lot of frustrations, Christians, they actually go about living as if they expect that there should be justice in this world. But, you know, for me, if you look at the great sweep of the story, you've got a God of steadfast love and a God of righteousness. We start in righteous relationship with him. When we broke righteous relationship with him, automatically there's a need for justice. But God has basically deferred that justice, covering it with his mercy. So if he's deferred the justice for us where we don't have to pay for our sins and basically we're allowed to live, then that means also justice is kind of on hold for the rest of the world. So if you go through this world thinking and expecting that things should be fair or things should be just, I think you're setting yourself up for something that's false. Now, as Christians, I think we should be reflections of God, so we should be agents of justice, and we should be the ones to try to bring justice into the world, but we shouldn't actually expect it. And I think that a lot of Christians thinking that, hey, I'm doing the right thing, the world should be just, and confronted with the reality of an unjust world, it kind of shakes them up. But I don't think we should expect a just world.
No, and we shouldn't expect to get justice for ourselves. And part of it comes into we are defining justice our way, not God's way.
You expect justice.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that was my question on which way you define justice. I mean, if you're talking about justice from a biblical standpoint, should we expect that? I think God has his own plan, right? So, but we should expect justice from our own authorities, right? Which is self-interested, right?
It's interesting. I think we should advocate for it and strive for it. But if we actually think it's going to happen, I think that we're deluding ourselves, right? I mean, we're advocating, we're pushing, but to expect any human organization to execute at 100% any kind of intellectual construct, I think we're setting ourselves up, right? Like, I think we know that there's going to be just flaws.
Well, go ahead.
You are talking about two different questions. So this is if I try to do this. So he said so the end point is there's no indifference. But at the beginning, he complained the difference between just and unjust. That's why he complains.
Yeah.
It's basically the end of disprove the beginning. My point is we don't attend the justice. It's there. We can attend that. Yeah, but we try. The same thing we are Christian, but we are not Christ. There's something we will try to approach, but we don't attend. But we should have a kind of a motivation to try to. I'll give you an example. If you look at evidence, if you play sports, we are more just than before. Like, you play Super Bowl, the people who get the medal, who the champion, is still based on performance. This mostly is just. Right? I mean, there's justice, but you don't get whatever, you cannot get everything just. I mean, you still try to approach. That's why when we look at sports, we try to every event, every minute, that's the way we try to approach that. It's a different way because it's a process. In the big picture, it's a process. We don't get an outcome in a universal way, but we try to make sure the process approach the outcome. Yeah.
Well, I think you guys are right. I mean, we're meant to try to reflect justice into our world, but we're promised we're not going to get justice in this world. We're promised we're going to get suffering. We're the light that's supposed to shine into the darkness. The darkness is the injustice in this world. So it's something we struggle with. I got one more quote before we move on from this. This is out of the same book, and this is one of my favorite quotes. It's actually one of the most quoted of his quotes. He says, "DNA neither cares nor knows, just is, and we dance to its music." That was, Richard Dawkins says, "You're dancing in your DNA." John Lennox used this against him in one of the debates. So, what do you think about this? Well,
Oh, he's actually changing his mind.
Is it? Wait! Don't jump ahead. So Dawkins claims there's no evil and there's no good, but that there's pitiless indifference, and we dance in our DNA. Right? That's kind of what he was saying. But if we go back to his first quote, I just highlighted a couple of them. It doesn't look like indifference to me. I mean, he's judging God, but he says there's no good and bad. It looks like he's judging a good and bad quite dramatically. I mean, God is jealous. Well, that sounds like he's making a ethical claim on God. He's petty. He's unjust. Misogynistic. I have to admit, I didn't know. No, I hear that word all the time, and I did not know what it was. And I was like, I got to actually look it up so I can say something. You guys know what it is? I didn't know what it was.
Exactly, I think I know, but I'm not.
Hatred of women. I was like, okay, I don't.
Is he married?
Exactly. It's
But this guy, this is all opinionated. His opinion.
Yeah, of
That's all
course.
it is. There's nothing based on facts. It's all
Yeah.
opinionated. It's.
well, if you guys were here when we did the moral argument,
Claims.
William Lane Craig kind of addressed this. He said, Richard is actually a moral realist because he has all these complaints about God, and in fact, there's lots of he is very aware of what's right and wrong in the world. He just doesn't have a basis for it.
Well, he talks about basis. It's like the legacy of a Christian world.
Well, his basis is God. He actually, what I said, maybe I should stick to what I wrote because it's better than what I'm saying, is this idea that what is his basis for making these claims? Well, whether Richard Dawkins knows it or not, he believes in God. Yes. Because he can only have these perspectives if there's a God. Because if there's no basis for right and wrong, then there's no right and wrong. It's exactly what he said in the second book. It's just no good, no purpose, no bad. There can't be any of those things because it's just us dancing in our DNA. Richard Dawkins actually believes in God, even though he claims to be an atheist, because he hates him. Although it's changing, like Judy was saying. He seems to be drifting in a positive direction.
He goes back and studies new biology. He's going to find out none of
That's
that.
actually, that's not the one he's for sure knows that it's not God for the biology. Now the immoral evil that's happening in the world with
The wokeness is
and
what's
all that
driven
stuff.
him.
It's like,
He went from saying that Christianity was
It's
a
bad.
plague on humanity to saying
Now
that
it's
it
like-
should be taught.
yeah.
That's a pretty big shift, okay? Well,
It was pretty new. It was last year.
they posted on the internet. I mean, he's not hiding his opinion.
Yeah, it was last year that it would be better. It's like, I think most Islamic teaching would be detrimental. It's like the Christian, world we were teaching is the way to go because it's better for the world.
But he's seeing the fact that there has to be a standard. Because you can't determine right and wrong and good and bad if there's not something to base that on. And even Richard Dawkins is now saying, Christianity might be a good basis.
You know, he could be modern day Paul.
He could be. I pray for Richard Dawkins on a regular basis when I read his stuff because it's like, he's... And John Lennox, one of my favorite guys, and he teach at the same university. And since they debated, they actually become friends. And they do talk on a regular basis. Every once in a while, John Lennox will mention Richard or a conversation he's had over tea or whatever. They're both Brits. So I'm hopeful. That would be amazing if he would. Because he is an incredibly articulate speaker. He just is confused. But that doesn't really solve our problem of evil, but I think Richard made my case for me that evil actually proves that God exists. It doesn't prove he doesn't exist. Now that doesn't get us all the way there, obviously, because now we have evil and we have this perfect loving God and we have to reconcile that. So if we're to reconcile that, there has to be a purpose for evil.
Actually, the reason we know that those things evil and not non-evil is actually is already put there in our mind.
Right.
Well, and I think that one thing we need to think about is the word evil. And we're going to get to defining it because if there's not a basis, then it's just opinion. So there's got to be the basis. Like I said, even Richard Dawkins agrees there has to be a basis. So when we start talking about a purpose for evil, our conversation is going to get a little harder to have because of our personal experiences. So again, I'm not a pastor, I'm not a counselor. Can you imagine a purpose for evil?
Not a primary purpose, because if God is like a primary cause, I think God as a primary cause can do no evil because it's the opposite of his nature. So there's not a primary cause to evil. I think because of man's self-determination in the fall, evil then does exist. And then, so God isn't the cause of it, but now it exists. God can use things for good.
To drive people to good.
Yeah, it comes down to actually the wrong question, right? The question is, why is there evil? Not really what the purpose for evil is. And I think that's where we kind of have to twist. When we're dealing with people that are trying to prove that God doesn't exist, they tend to want to lean things in their favor. There's a reason evil exists, right? So that if we can answer the why question, then we can start walking this down a path that people might be able to get. So first thing we have to do is actually get a definition for evil. Because I hear evil tossed around about so many things. So what is evil? I'll just give you a working definition. Evil is the absence of goodness. It's an imperfection in this world. If God is the source of goodness, then evil has to be where God's goodness isn't, right? And I'll give you a couple examples to kind of put this in your brain. But think about it. If you removed all the goodness from the world, would there be evil?
All the goodness from the
If everything was evil, there is nothing to compare it to. So there wouldn't be a contrast. We require a contrast. And Frank Turek, one of my favorite Christian apologists, uses this example. He says, if I was to remove all the rust from this car, what would I have?
A new car.
Well, a nicer car at least. What happens if I removed all the car from the rust?
Still in the rust.
I got nothing. Rust is a imperfection on the car. Now you might have a pile of rust, but you wouldn't have a car anymore if you removed all the good car from the rust. Another good example is shadow. Shadow requires a light. If you take the light away, what do you have? Well, you don't have a shadow anymore. Another one, sunshine. I love sunshiny days. Sunshine. What happens if the sun goes away? Got nothing. You kind of get my point. I got a couple others just for kicks and giggles. Cold. You're talking about cold the other day, right? Cold's not a thing, right? It's just the absence of heat. In fact, you can't measure coldness. And I know what cold is. I've been on the north slope of Alaska in February, minus 40 degrees with wind chill, whiteout conditions. I've been in Finland in the wintertime. That's cold. Okay, so I know what cold is, but scientifically, cold's really not a thing. It's just the absence of heat. So the lack of something isn't something. It's just how we're describing it. And that's, I think, how we need to think of evil. It's the absence of what we wish was there, which is goodness. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, I can do without cold though. We can go to the next slide.
Well, the next slide I'm going to hesitate to go to because this is one of those that it won't be very pleasant. But so what is evil? Well, evil is terrorism, war, famine, disease. These are bad things. But are they evil?
What evil
There's definitely absence of goodness.
There is an absence of goodness there. In at least most of these.
Do evil.
There's intentions to do evil.
There's intentions to do good in war, but the act of war on each side becomes evil.
Yes, I think that's fair. Not always is the intent evil, but the actions can be construed as
right.
evil.
Do something good.
Yep.
So I think what we have to do if we want to attack the evil question is break evil into categories so we can kind of get our minds around it. And effectively, there's two types of evil that most people use. One is moral evil. This is humans doing something bad against another human. That's moral evil. Then there's natural evil. These are things like disease, hurricane, wildfire, earthquakes, those type of things. And people call those evil. So with your permission, I'm going to break into these two categories so we can kind of start dissecting this topic a little more. And mankind's wickedness creates a lot of evil. We know that. We've all experienced that. That's where you get war and murder and terrorism and rape and human trafficking. You also get things like envy. You get, jealousy. I mean, those are bad things too. Yep. So where are you going to draw the line? So, okay. The real question is it evil or is it bad? And it's really about perspective. We often toss everything into the evil bucket that's bad, but is it really bad or is it from your perspective? And this is one that's, well, it's tough to get your head around because you usually think of things from your own personal situation and how you view things. And there's no question there's a lot of suffering in our world. And when we see things as really, really bad. The question is, does it translate into what we should be calling evil or is it bad? There's a difference.
So if you go theologically, I don't know the answer to this, right? But when Jesus is defining sin, and what word is he using? Because I think of the continuum of most of us would say that if I just walked into this room and shot someone, most of us I hope would put that in the evil category. But then Jesus says, if I even say a bad word against someone, that he puts that up at that same level. So if Jesus is conflating those two things, the question is evil or bad? Is that a false distinction that we...
Well, he's talking about sin, and you're equivalating sin with evil.
I would definitely make that. I would personally make that.
Yeah, it make the danger in doing that is it's a broad brush. And a broad brush is very hard to define and characterize in a way that you can logically and reasonably address people's concerns. And what I am suggesting is we should maybe dissect it a little deeper, and look at what how God defines things for sure. And we need to be aware of God's perspective on things before we just toss everything into the evil bucket. And you're not wrong. I'm presenting an alternative to just the one bucket fits everything approach. Because you can get to the point where, the dog puking on the floor becomes evil, and depending on the circumstance, you need to be very clear on how we're defining it. Because the people are trying to put as many things in that bucket as they possibly can. Because the more evil there is, you saw the argument, well, that's proof that there's no God, right? Because there's so much evil in the world. And
So just to take a stab at that then, if the law and the prophets all come down to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbors yourself, then you can take me wherever we go, but I would say that any volitional action that goes against those two laws, I would put that in the evil bucket, not the bad bucket, basically. But I don't know.
yeah, well, let's move on and let's see how that plays out. Because I understand exactly what you're saying, but I want to look at natural evil first, because this is one that we actually only had a couple on the natural side. That's actually the reason I put it on two sides, right? Effectively, all of these are moral, and these are natural. I can't spell. It's a good thing I'm not a professor anymore. Let's deal with natural sin, because believe it or not, this is one people struggle with a lot.
Natural evil.
Natural evil. Sorry, I said natural sin. Sorry, Chris has got me using his vernacular. That's okay. So natural sin. These are things like earthquakes, typhoons, floods, lightning, extreme cold and hot, drought. You can probably come up with a lot of others. And disease, for sure. And there is no question that these are bad. And I'm going to focus on natural disasters more than disease to make my point. The aftermath of things like natural disasters or disease seems really bad to everybody. Now, whether you're in it or whether you're not in it. When you see it on TV, you think it's bad. There is suffering, there's death, there's devastation. The question is, why do we think that is evil? It's bad. No question it's bad.
I mean, it goes against the flourishing of life, basically. I mean, maybe that's the reaction.
And I think that's a really strong argument, the flourishing of life. Again, you have to decide who gets to define what that looks like. Our planet has mechanisms, according to Richard Dawkins, and it behaves a certain way. And natural disasters are actually part of that mechanism. I actually, you see so often, let's say a hurricane comes through and devastates a huge area, and you'll see quotes of, people, why would God allow this to happen? And I personally think blaming God's kind of absurd if you're not believing in God to start with, right? And these are people that often are screaming. And the naturalist is very quick to blame God for something that happened in nature, yet they say they don't believe God. And I always struggle with, why are they doing that? So, it's really naturalism, right? That's what natural things are. And I would probably cross out the ism and just go to natural. I think the mechanisms of our planet is how God has designed it. And to raise natural disaster to the level of evil, I think, is kind of absurd. Now, bad. I don't like it when our house got hit by a tornado. It wasn't good for me. It was scary, but it wasn't evil, and I can't blame God for that because tornadoes happen in this area.
So, very good point about what you're talking about, because think about the flood, right? Was that evil, or was it good because God made it happen?
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, it's perspective, right? And actually, perspective in the end is going to define what evil is. And I think that's kind of where we're going to get. I mean,
But the argument, I will say, even we follow our human perspective, that the fact that we do not know the long-term.
Well,
Think about it, even we believe our humanity is a benchmark. There's no blood, the people will eat each other. You look at the age, they will fight each other, they will eat each other. They will decrease with no return. Actually, the blood have a little bit return in the long term. So the other thing, I'll give you one evidence, the naturalism. You are right. So in China, in Asian China, we have an old saying is called a heavy snow is prophecy for harvest. So basically what that means is that with the winter, in Chinese is 瑞雪兆丰年, 5 words. What that means, at least in central China, if the winter is very, very cold, a lot of snow, that's good things. Because if there's no snow, then the wheat has no water, then will be dry, and then there will be no harvest. So, but nowadays you will see, okay, it's too cold. But at that time, people follow the agricultural calendar. They know what they should prepare. So, it's just different way to look at how do you use.
yeah, in natural things, I mean, the example I came up with, which is a little absurd, but I'll share it anyways. If I walk up to a lion and I yank its tail, and it turns around and kills me or hurts me, is it God's fault?
no, it's yours for all this day.
Well, it's not even the lion's fault. It's just natural. Well, it's the stupidity factors in. Another one would be, okay, weather. We're always obsessed with weather. Why don't we blame the weatherman for a bad weather report?
My husband does all the time.
Well,
Well, we blame them for being
we
wrong.
blame them for being wrong, but
But I guess the core of their argument would be that yes, we know that these natural things are all happening. But if you look at, say, the tsunami that happened, a decade ago, that wiped out hundreds of thousands of people, I think the atheist argument would be, hey, you're telling me that there is a personal, all-powerful God, and He's in charge of everything. And I know that naturally stuff happens. There can be volcanoes here, volcanoes there, floods there, and floods that. But really, we couldn't stop, 200,000, 300,000 people from getting wiped out on one place. I mean, that's where they're coming from.
it's definitely, and it comes back to death. And we're going to come back to death here later, because I think most of the things that we look at when it comes down to natural evil is because of our perception of death. And we consider death to be evil in a lot of cases, and it's not, by the way. It's just the way the world works. I mean, those 200,000 people could have had their heart stopped by a heart attack, and you wouldn't blame God for that, right? Or they could have died from cancer or from being hit by a truck, and all those people could still be dead today. So what's the difference between the tsunami and another natural death?
And if that's fair. I think our problems with death, not on terms that we define.
Yes.
Not everyone living living.
Yep, and we think, it's a travesty they didn't have 10 more years. I don't get to define that. And from my perspective, yes. But it's his perspective that matters. And that's where we have to grapple when we're faced with death. And I'll get back to that. But for the most part, I think natural evils are bad when it happens to you. But to call it evil, I think, is going a little too far. I think natural
I never think
things.
natural stuff is evil. It's not good. But
Yeah, you hear this from the atheists a lot. They go after disease often as one of the hammers. know, why do these kids with cancer, which you go to a place and you see kids having cancer treatment, it brings you to your knees. And I don't have an answer, but I know God does. And the point is, we know with overwhelming evidence that God exists. The fact that we call things evil, that means God exists. So we have two choices. We have the choice, it's my own phone, gosh, sorry. How bad is that when the teacher doesn't mute his own phone? What we're faced with is two options. It's trust God and search for purpose, or be angry at God and face the consequences of being angry at the creator of the universe. It doesn't sound like a really good option. You only have those two in the reality. So, okay, let's look at I'm going to just get a little started before we take a break. So, moral evil is usually the one people have the most trouble with. Okay, and this is what humans do to each other. And I think we all as Christians recognize that free will is the origin of most evil acts between people. People make choices and they make bad choices. Would anybody question that? But I think the question really comes down to this one, what they call gratuitous evil. Gratuitous evil, let me see if I can find my definition. I need to not get off script. These are things like the Holocaust. These are things like, rapes and murders, senseless evil that we believe that, as Rose said earlier, that these extreme instances of intense suffering, which an omnipotent, omniscient being could have prevented without losing some greater good or permitting some evil equally or bad or worse. That's really what we're struggling with. Why doesn't God do something about it? Because it looks like if he did something about it, it wouldn't make any difference. Let's hold on to that and take a break, and then we'll come back and pick up there in a few minutes. Okay, so gratuitous evil. This is the one that people struggle with. But I wanted to start with a quote from C.S. Lewis, one of my favorites. He experienced, World War I think was the one that really, he was an atheist, and he just couldn't get around all the gratuitous evil that he had witnessed in that brutal war, which World War I was. And he wrote this in Mere Christianity. I think it really sums up kind of our problems with this. And he says, "My argument against God was that the universe seemed so cruel and unjust. But how had I got the idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of what a straight line is. What was I comparing the universe with when I called it unjust?" And just kind of percolate on that for a little while. When we start calling everything evil, we have to have a contrast, right? So again, gratuitous evil. I want to show you, this is kind of a long video. This is Frank
That's what
Turek.
goes on here.
And
when you go through
hold to the
difficulty,
end.
you're enhancing your
It's pretty
soul.
powerful.
You're growing your soul. When you get everything you want, you're shrinking it. And this is what I think Paul is saying, that our light and momentary afflictions are achieving for us a greater glory that far outweighs them all. And when you go through difficulty, it will lead to a greater good. In fact, this is what the scriptures say, that suffering will bring a greater good. Paul actually says this in Romans 8. He says, "And we know that all things work together for good to those that love God, to those who are called according to his purpose." Notice how he doesn't say all things are good. No, there's a lot of evil out there. He's saying that all things work together for good. So when somebody says, "Why do babies die?" Well, I can say, I don't know. I know why babies die in general, because we live in a fallen world. I mean, imagine this. Imagine if you were indestructible till age 70. Imagine if that were the case. I don't know about you, but I think we'd be incredibly reckless until 69 years and 11 months, right? And then we go, I guess we got to get serious about this thing, right? No, we live in a fallen world. I know why there's evil, and I know why people die now. But if you're going to ask me why does a particular baby die, I don't know why that particular baby dies, but I know why I don't know why. Because I'm finite, I'm inside of time, and God is outside of time. He can see the end from the beginning. He can see how it can all work together. Now, after I explained all this at Michigan State, how do you think the atheist looked? He looked like this. He said, that doesn't explain it all. Okay, I can see how some evil can lead to good. But there's some evil out there that has absolutely no good that results from it. It's what philosophers call gratuitous evil. There's no good that can ever come from it. So I said, sir, how could you know that? You'd have to be God to know that. Now, it is true. If life just ends at the tomb, yeah, there's a lot of evil that probably has no ultimate good to it. There's no justice, right? There are many people that go to the grave who have committed crimes that have never been punished. Many rights are not wronged. There are many goods that never arrive, because if life ends at the grave, there's no resolution. But what if life doesn't end at the grave? What if it goes beyond the grave? Then what? This is what Paul's saying. We need to have an eternal perspective. I've been struggling with evil, the question of evil, for a long time, until I discovered one thing called the ripple effect. What's the ripple effect? That everything that happens today ripples forward into the future to affect billions, if not trillions, of other events. In fact, think of the ripple effect in your own life. I mean, let's just think about your parents. Your parents had to meet for you to be here. And then their parents had to meet for them to be here and you to be here. And then their parents had to meet. Think about all the ripples that went into you sitting here right now. Some of those ripples were good. Some of those ripples were bad. But God can bring good from evil even when we can't see it. Why does a particular baby die now? I don't know, but I know why I don't know why. Maybe a particular baby dying now ripples forward into the future to somehow create 500 years from now a great evangelist who saves millions of people. That baby dying contributed to that great evangelist. I can't see that. I'm inside of time, but God can see the end from the beginning. This is why he can bring good from evil even when we can't see it. This is the ripple effect. Now, the Bible talks about the ripple effect, but not in these words. In fact, you remember Joseph from the Old Testament? Joseph is sold into slavery by his brothers who don't like him because he's dad's favorite. And then he winds up in Egypt, and he's falsely accused in Egypt, but then somehow he works his way into prominence in Egypt, and he puts a lot of grain aside. And then his family, many years later, leave Israel to escape a famine. They come to Egypt to escape the famine, and as soon as Joseph sees them, as soon as he recognizes them, these are the people, his family, that sold him into slavery, what does he say? You dirty rats, you're going to pay for what you did to me. No, he doesn't say that. What does he say? Here's what he says. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. He could actually see the ripple effect. The very people that did evil to Joseph, that evil rippled forward to help them later. Now, of course, we don't do evil so that evil or good will result, but sometimes God shows that to us. Showed it to us in this passage right here. So the bottom line to the whole thing is that while respecting free choice, God can bring good from evil, even when we can't see it. Now, when people often bring up this problem of God and evil, they normally say this, that God is all loving and all powerful. If he's all loving and all powerful, why does evil still exist? What they say is he's either not all loving, or he's not all powerful, or he's neither, because evil still exists. But you know what people are forgetting when they try and say this? Yeah, God is all loving. Yeah, God is all powerful. They also forget that God is all wise, that God is all knowing. He can see the end from the beginning. He can see how all the ripples come together. One of the most profound things ever said on this topic was said by a Roman Catholic priest about 150 years ago at Notre Dame in France, in Paris. And here's what he said about this issue. He said, if God would concede me his power for 24 hours, you would see how many changes I would make in the world. But if he gave me his wisdom too, I would leave things as they are. God knows the end from the beginning. We don't. Ripples can go forward to places we have no concept of. So when something evil takes place and you go, I can't see any good coming from this. Of course you can't see any good coming from it. You're a speck in time. God sees how it all works together. So I explained all that at Michigan State. We're still there. And then about 10 feet from the atheist, a man raised his hand. So I said, yes, sir. So he said, I know of a woman who was raped. And he looked over at the atheist. And he looked back at me. And he said, this rape nearly destroyed this woman. In fact, she became pregnant as a result of the rape. But she decided that she was not going to punish the baby for the sin of the father. She decided to bring this baby to term. And his voice started to crack. And he said, this baby was a boy who grew up to be a man and actually became a pastor. By this time, he's crying in front of everybody. And he said, this pastor has led a lot of people to Christ and has discipled a lot of people in Christ. And that pastor is me. And then he looked over at the atheist and he said, if my mom can bring good from evil, so can God. And I said, you're dismissed. I mean, how could I add to that? He had a better way of saying it than I did. So how do you think the atheist looked after that? He ran away.
There. What do you guys think of Frank's take? He's a lot more elegant than I am in speaking, but I thought it was a really powerful example of we don't always have a perspective. And what that preacher said, you know, if my mom can make good out of evil, then how much more God? And I think that's a perspective that we need kind of take into account. You know, is there a purpose for the bad things or the evil things? And I think the answer is yes. Now, do I understand it? No, I don't understand it. But I think we have to trust God and that there's a purpose. Because if we believe God is all the things we claim He is, then there has to be a purpose for those bad things. Why He allows it, I don't think we're going to know this side of heaven. But if you really believe in God, and we've proven God pretty much with overwhelming evidence, then we have to believe that there is a reason to why the world works the way it does. It's not necessarily comforting, but it is truthful. And there's no question that in natural disasters, when you're in the middle, it's not very good for you. But one thing you see, and I'll use natural disaster as my example, what do you see happens most when something bad happens? Well, Christians usually show up. We get a chance to see a glimpse of what we were actually supposed to act like all the time. You know, helping your neighbor. You know, when 9/11 happened in the United States, the churches filled up. Why was that? There's something in us, and we know that there's someone that actually is in control, and we need to take that into account. So let's talk a little bit about the remedy, and I'll try to go quickly through this. Obviously, Frank talked about the fact if it stops at death, then our perception of death actually almost becomes evil. If you think about where we define evil, it usually ends in death. of some sort, right? But as Christians, we're supposed to think a little further. And you notice the timeline doesn't stop just because my computer is only so big. It doesn't stop at death. Death is really graduation to the rest of our eternity. And if we're Christians, our eternity started the day we became a follower of Jesus. The death is just the graduation to what's beyond this, which this can be kind of difficult. And let me get. I'm going to share a scripture with you, and it's the Sermon on the Mount. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, or where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroy, and neither thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. I'm sure all of you have heard this scripture, and I have to admit, most of my life I had no idea what this meant. It boggled me. I didn't understand what Jesus was trying to tell us. And, you can't take anything with you, right? I mean, so what is the treasure I can actually lay up in heaven when I die? And in March of 2021, I got sick with COVID. And for 2 weeks, I was here at home. And I was sure I was going to kick COVID. And then I couldn't stand up anymore. And my wife convinced me, although I don't think I had much resistance, to go to the hospital by then. And when we went into what was probably one of the busiest emergency rooms in the country at the time, I was sick enough they took me immediately. Judy couldn't go with me because of COVID, and they put me in the COVID isolation ward. And for 3 days I was gone. I mean, I was dead. I was sure I was dying. I was in and out of consciousness. There's a lot more to this story that I won't share with you, but during that time I had a dream, a vision, whatever you might call it, and I felt like I was in a position where I could make a choice. And the choice I was given was to die and be with Jesus, or to recover and come back to my family. And it was a really easy choice for me. I said I was ready to die. And I have this sensation, and it's not a near-death experience. I'm not claiming anything like that, but I had this sensation that Jesus was patting me on my shoulder, right here. And I can't see his face, but I see the smile on his face. And he said 2 words that are etched in my memory: not yet. And then I got better. A week later, I came home. And I hugged my kids and slept in my bed. And the next morning, I woke up in excruciating pain. I knew what the pain was. I'd had kidney stones before.
Then we know, because the CAT scan showed
and they had told me.
There.
Not very aware how large they were, though, but they were big. So after about 5 hours of extreme discomfort, my wife again convinced me, although I don't know that I had a lot of choice, to go back to the emergency room. She took me to the emergency room up here in Siena. And again, it's COVID, right? I'm still positive with COVID, okay? So the whole emergency room staff is scared of me. It's in the middle of COVID, right? So they stick me in a room, and I'm dying with pain. And the emergency call room, the nurse call button is on the floor, and I'm on the bed, and I am moaning with pain for about 5 hours, and no one comes to help me. Eventually, they transferred me downtown to Methodist again, and I find out that the kidney stones I have are about twice the size of your ureter, which means you can't pass them, and I have to have intervention. That's a whole nother story, and I won't go into it. So God sometimes puts you through things you don't understand. But I really believe there's a purpose. And I had peace, I had assurance through all of it. Like I said, I was ready to die. It's like, you people that prayed for me, it's like, thank you for the prayers, but it'd been better if I went to heaven. But I believe God has a purpose for us. That's the reason not yet. This last spring, this is Eden. I don't know, I think I shared her story a little bit last time I spoke at the church. This is one of our students in the Philippines. And every kid in the Philippines is our kid. We have almost 300 kids in our scholarship program now. And she actually was pretty good about communicating with me. And this is letters from January 2023. And when she started with us, she would send me messages like, you make me go to church. She was not a church-going type. Because we do, we make them go to church. We're not apologetic about that. You're making me go to church. I don't want to go to church. After a year, she's baptized and very active in the church and understands why we made her go to church. And in fact, in this message, she was telling me how thankful she was that we made her go to church. And in spring of this past year, she graduated. First in her family to ever graduate with a teaching degree. And she had this on her Facebook. She sent me a message very similar to it. Just thanking us for praying for her and supporting her. And most importantly, what she was thankful for is because of us fortunate to go to church, she got to know who Jesus really was. And that was the most important thing in her life. And in August, she died. She had a cancer of some sort. We don't know exactly what. But so 2 months after she graduated, she died. And I mourned that loss. I still mourn that loss. And you wonder why. What does God have in mind with something like this? Her mother had sacrificed for her to go to school. Her brother actually had to stop going to school so she could finish. And when we were in the Philippines this last fall in October, 2 months after her death, I got a chance to meet her mom, who's now baptized and a follower of Jesus. And her mom told me this. Let's see if I can find it. She said, Eden's love for Jesus made me want that too. Think about that. Was her death worth it? Her mother probably was. There's something good that can be made out of something that we would perceive as bad. Because her mom probably would never have come to a relationship with Jesus if Eden had not had that event. And I mourn Eden's loss, but one person is actually worth it. And sometimes we have to keep that in mind. Death is not bad, no matter what the world wants to tell us. I can tell you, dying's not that bad. I was close, and I look forward to it, I'll be honest. That's going to be a good day, not a bad day. As a Christian, it's a graduation, and we need to remember that. So, evil is the absence of goodness. That's really what it is.
Oh, and by the way, to connect with your said about Matthew, she's the treasure.
Oh, yeah, sorry. This is what happens when I start crying.
Those are the treasure that you take to heaven.
Yeah, since I came back, I'm much more emotional. The inhibitions of life and being tough are all gone. It's one thing a near-death experience does for you. Yeah, she is. People are the treasure. That is the link, and I apologize for not doing that. I didn't get that the purpose we have in life, all this drudgery and struggles that we have is about other people. If you're a follower of Christ, the reason you're still here, the reason we don't get beamed up as soon as we believe, is other people. And there's a reason we go through troubles in this life, because it tends to bring us to our knees and know that we need God. So again, evil is the absence of goodness. We kind of understand that. No evil without goodness, right? and goodness comes from God. That's actually our logical proof for God out of evil. It's not that there's evil does not disprove God. The fact that we perceive something as bad actually proves God. So the problem of evil, it's really not the problem of evil. It's our problem with evil, right? It's how we perceive things. And I found this quote from The Problem of Pain from C.S. Lewis, and I think it speaks to this really, really well. God whispers to us in our pleasure, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pain. It is the megaphone to rouse the deaf world. And that's just who we are. We sometimes need something to wake us up to the fact that God really does care about us.
And then in addition to that sometimes God will gift you with understanding on why He does certain things. One of our examples is our father died when he was 40 years old. My oldest sister was only 12. I was 11. Another brother was 7 and 4, and Joy is 1 year old. And it's like, why? It was hard. Life was hard when he passed. But God knows that Mom can handle it without my father, and here we are. We talk about it. It's like, hey, if our father did not die, our life would be so different compared now. And I like what our lives now turn out to be. We all managed to get through God's provision. We all managed to get a college degrees, and we have good jobs, and we're actually like doing well and close to Him. Not all of my siblings are, though I think there's only one now that's not that close to God. But if I think of that, it's like if Father was alive, we're probably all in the Philippines, we're doing different things, I'd be a teacher instead of a nurse. It's just this life is so much better than what I can imagine if my father was still alive.
We're talking about the ripple.
I really like the way Frank put that. That's the reason I wanted you guys to see that big chunk of his video. And C.S. Lewis kind of understand that without pain, humans don't usually look for God. It's a sad commentary on us, but it's sadly true. And the question we have to ask ourselves is if it takes pain for you to look for God, then is the pain worth it? Yes. I say yes. I don't wish pain on anyone, but I wish God for everyone. And if pain is the only way they're going to get there, then there's a purpose. Now, I can say from my own pain experience that it wasn't very pleasant. But the person that I came back as is very different than the person I went in as.
Yeah, after COVID, he was totally a different person. He finally fall in love with the Lord like above anything else. So he has to get sick with COVID and get kidney stone to be able to change.
Yeah, it took a near-death experience and extreme pain for me. It took the death of Eden for her mom. So, evil or bad, is it really evil, is a question you kind of have to wrestle with. Natural disasters, okay, obviously they're bad when you're in it, but it's if it brings you to your knees and makes you search for God, there's a purpose. 9/11, horrific terrorist act intended for evil, but it actually caused a revival within the Christian churches. We didn't maintain it very well. So, yeah, God can use things that we perceive as bad, and I think it's really our problem with evil. And I struggle with why we feel this way. If we are Christians and we read the Bible, why do we think we're not going to face problems?
There's a book that I was reading recently called Live No Lies, and all these lies we're susceptible to, they kind of come from basically our flesh, right? The fact that our primary experience in this world is not a spiritual experience primarily. Everyone has like a natural experience in the world. I think that's kind of where a lot of the discordance comes from. But Greg Mott, who's like the First Baptist pastor, he once said, he's like, we have to live our lives. We cannot put emotions in the front of our life. They kind of have to be the caboose. And so like the whole concept, I think, as we as Christians, maybe we need to like lay out, what does the really Bible say? It's different than what we feel. But I think we can find comfort in what the Bible says, right? Like the worst thing I think most of us can imagine is losing a child. So I have not had to go through that. But I would think that, like, if we look at what the Scripture says about that, to live as Christ, to die as gain, all the goodness of God and what it is, even though it doesn't take away the emotional pain of our separation, we have the framework to process it. And I think somehow we have to have an architecture where we understand what the Bible says. It doesn't make the pain go away, but it helps us to know the objective truth of our subjective experience. Because if we just live in our subjective experience and we call that, we're just going to, I don't know.
Well, no, and I think you're really right. And I think it's the reason, I think history is a good thing to learn. And we should be learning our Christian history. I look at this chart. This is the 12 apostles plus Paul and Matthias, who replaced Judas Iscariot. Huh? Okay. They didn't die very good deaths. I won't go into the detail, but they were all martyred, with the exception of maybe the Apostle John, who was, by church tradition, he was boiled alive, and then he didn't die, so they sent him to Patmos, which is where he wrote the book of Revelation, right? So these are Jesus' closest friends. And they faced what we would consider to be evil. And we still consider that Jesus loved them, right? Or, early Christians were used as lampposts, or fed to animals, or crucified. And yet God loved every single one of them. And in fact, their testimonies are great encouragement to us if we are brave enough to learn their stories.
I think part of the problem with us as the Western Church, especially, that we're taught that, prosperity and fairness, and if you love God, everything's going to go good with you. And so I think, not all churches, of course, but that it's prevalent in the United States.
Well, a question you have to ask, and this is something that gets asked once in a while. It's like, okay, if
I have a problem with that. Why we have this feeling of not liking this world perceived as evil? Because in the perfect world, the not marred world, not fallen world, that was the design. Mm-hmm. But the problem now is we are on the world that has fallen. Yeah. So our instinct still has the original design that it's supposed to be perfect.
It should be good.
So we have that. That's the idea. But now we are on a fallen world, and we have to accept the fact that we are in this state, and there's already this things that we perceive as evil. That's not perfect. It's marred. And now we have to view it, and now that we are in this state, what is God's purpose for those things now?
Yeah, I know I don't know who this quote's from. I can't find it in my notes, but there was an atheist that challenged one of the Christian apologists. It's, okay, you believe in an omnipotent, perfectly loving, omniscient God. Why would he not eliminate all evil from the world? The response was, are you willing for him to start with you? Because we're all have evil thoughts. Let's face it. We all do. The conversation was over and they changed the subject.
I can answer
Restore it.
when the people throw stone woman.
Yeah.
It's exactly what Jesus did. The one without sin cast the first stone.
But I guess like your first question, so that won't work actually. If you look at even the people who talk about economy, it's called rights and privilege. So if you think about the last prayer, so we always pray, the patient God give us daily bread. But people don't know sick. People don't think you are privileged that you will have a daily bread and not like other bread or other bread. Your day is your privilege. It's not right. So the people they think so because once they believe if they become one category, they should have the rights to get ABC, to avoid ABC. Then they will feel it's unfair. They deserve you. So you deserve your right, but they don't think it's your privilege. I mean, you already have more than you should deserve. So that's my side.
No, and I think Connie was kind of right. In the Western Church, we've kind of promoted this idea that we're God's selected people. We are the children of God. Why would we face suffering? It's like, why not? Oh, sorry, I put that down. Yeah, I wasn't supposed to get sunny, so I'm sorry I didn't put up the tarp. So I think learning about the history of the church is really paramount if you're going to be a strong Christian. And 2 books I would highly recommend if you've never read them, which are hard to read, is Fox's Book of Martyrs and The Voice of the Martyrs, which is the second one, which is the modern martyrs. We think it happened 2,000 years ago. You'll find out it's happening right now. And these are our brothers and sisters in Christ. And learning their stories, while it is somewhat devastating to think that it happens right now, it's happening as we're speaking, seeing how they persevere, how God helps them to persevere, and more importantly, how their faith stays strong is very encouraging. Because chances are we won't face some of the things that they faced, but there's no promises. Go ahead.
Get that little magazine, so not hardly more than a pamphlet that comes out, Voice of the Martyrs. Yeah, we do. Yeah, I get it too. Yeah, I get it too.
Wormbrand's gone, but Sabrina's still around.
No, she's dead.
She's dead now too.
But I mean, if you've never heard their story, I'll give you some links. They've made movies out of both her. Yeah. I mean, amazing. Survived the Nazis and ended up stuck with the communists in Romania. But those stories are what we should expect as Christians. And that actually is good news. It's not bad news. Who was it we were listening to? Afrim Javed? I can't think. Yeah, he's used to be Hezbollah from Iran. And he had a face-to-face meeting with Jesus, and that's what changed him. And his mother prays that he'll be martyred because it would be a great privilege to die for Christ. And honestly, it's true of all of us. If you think about it, if you're privileged enough to suffer for Christ, think of, go ahead, Joy.
Like Steve Gray, he says it's like, we're all gonna die, might as well be worth it. It's like if you die for Jesus, it's like it's a privilege. You go to heaven and then everybody's talking about their war stories. How did you end up? How did you die? Oh, I got tortured. I got torched in the flame when I was preaching about Jesus. And then it's like, if you die, oh, I got a roller coaster accident. It's like, oh, yeah, changed.
So I think like in our contemporary world, outside this room, if you talk to your proponent for martyrdom, it may not help your witness with somebody who doesn't know Christ. I think that because a lot of people are going to view martyrdom in terms of the way it's kind of going through Islamic terrorism, which is, hey, I'm going to be a martyr, but I'm taking 50 people with me. So I think, we have to kind of make sure the martyrdom we're talking about is Jesus Christ type of martyrdom. We're basically it's
dying in the service of Christ, but it's not killing other people.
Not the guilt.
Now, unfortunately, we do have to be careful. Chris is right. We have to be careful when we choose terms because terms have been hijacked. Killing other people is not really martyrdom. That's killing other people. And unfortunately, it has been hijacked. Martyring is when you die for your faith, holding to your faith. I don't know that blowing yourself up qualifies.
Well, especially taking everybody else.
By sacrificing your life
For the good.
But I won't argue semantics, but yeah, what we're really talking about is being willing to put your life on the line and allow someone to kill you effectively. You're not killing yourself.
Well, the girl at Columbine, you know, they killed her.
Yep.
They turned around and killed her and everything.
I knew, this is off my script, but I'll be quick. I knew a guy in I don't remember what country in Africa it was, and there were 4 of them driving a car, and they got stopped by an armed militia. And their driver was Muslim, and they asked him if he'd done his prayers that day. He said no, and they shot him right away. The second guy, they asked him if he'd done prayers. He said, no, I'm a Christian. Boom. He got shot right away. The third guy lied, and that's the one I spoke to. And he had huge regrets. He was a Christian because he lied. But being willing to say what you're supposed to say and take that bullet is really what we're talking about. And the bullet may be metaphorical in our culture, right? We could be talking about getting canceled, okay? But standing for what is right is something that we have to stand for. And the evil that's out there has to be stood against. And I think, what's the purpose of evil? I don't know. Does God have a purpose for it? I'm confident that he does. Okay, but we should not cave to it. We should take his example, because he gave everything for us. We got to be willing to give everything for him. And so evil proves God exists. There's a purpose for evil. I don't know what it is, but I trust God. And then the remedy, obviously, is us. Jesus in the church is the remedy for all the evil that we see in the world. The things that people do bad to other people is really kind of up to us. And I mentioned this with Alfred a moment ago. This is Blaise Pascal, and he says, in faith, there's enough light for those who want to believe and enough shadows to blind those that don't. And what this really is the reason why don't people get it? You know, the evidence is so obvious that there's God. And we can prove Jesus. The evidence is overwhelming for what we believe. We believe in an evidence-based faith, but people still don't believe. And so we have to recognize that their free will factors in, and that's where evil actually tends to come up. So it's our problem with evil, right? Is what it really comes down to, and how we're going to deal with what God's given. I wanted to show you the quote that Frank gave, because this Dominican monk, I thought this was just maybe the best quote I've ever heard. And I'll read it to you again. It's, if God would concede me his omnipotence for 24 hours, you would see how many things I would change in the world. But if he gave me his wisdom too, I would leave everything as they are. I mean, when we think we can imagine it better, we're basically saying that we could do God's job better than he does. And we got to kind of think about that. I mean, it doesn't make it easy for us to accept what's going on. But we need to trust in the one that actually knows what's going on. So, I'm way off my script as usual. I'm going to skip this video for time's sake. I wanted to just quickly go back to Sam Harris. Remember when he was defining what's right and wrong, he says it's all about human flourishing, kind of what you mentioned earlier. But it comes down to who gets to choose what human flourishing looks like. So we've got to be careful with allowing that argument, because in reality, human flourishing, while it sounds very practical and philosophical, God gets to define what that looks like, not us. I mean, human flourishing included killing everybody but 6 people in the flood, right? Human flourishing included the Tower of Babel, which confused everybody's speech and made it tough for them to communicate. That's not how we would define it. So we got to be really careful with taking that too far, Because that's another way that atheists try to get around this issue, right?
It's funny, but that'd be the argument that Dawkins would make, and now he's kind of coming to grips with that. There's no human flourishing without a standard, and it's going to lead to chaos.
Yep. And there isn't. There's got to be a standard bearer if you're going to have.
Yeah. I'm wrapping it up.
So I don't blame God for the things that go on. I don't blame him for the death of Eden. I can't possibly understand. But when you see things that are hard on your heart, and we know we have some in our church family right now, which is really hard on our heart, we have to trust God. We have to trust that he sees something that we can't see. And that we know God exists because there's so much evidence that he does. And if he exists, we have to trust him with whatever's going on. Okay. Laura, can I give you a hug? But God gives us glimpses in the middle of the pain. And that's the message. All right. Love you. So, yeah. We definitely have a problem with the things we perceive to be evil. And I'm sorry this was not cheery today. But it's a tough subject. But it's real. And we all experience it. And it hurts. And I don't understand. But I trust in the one that does. Okay? And the purpose I'll never understand on this side of heaven. There's just things that we won't. But it's okay to not understand. And sometimes we have to accept the fact that we're not going to. Okay? And we love because God called us to love others the way he loved them. And our lives is what's going to reach that next person, how we deal with the things. And if pain is what it takes, if the death of Eden is what it took for her mom, then it's worth it. Okay? Sorry for this. So next week will be a little more positive, I promise. We're going to get to talk about why we can trust the Bible. Because this is, after what we just talked about, this is what the atheists go after. They go after our scripture. And they have a lot of evidence that they're going to throw at us. All those problems in the Old Testament, slavery and genocide and all that kind of stuff. All the mistakes in the Bible. We're going to go through those and we're going to see, do their arguments have any teeth to them? They don't. But we need to look at it because this is what people challenge us with. And if we can prove that God exists to an atheist, which we kind of have given them evidence and it may not prove it to them, we can show them how we deal with the bad stuff that they have to deal with, which is evil. Everybody has to deal with bad stuff. Now they're going to be open to the next step, which is if I can prove to them in a way that is logical and reasonable that what is talked about in the Bible is true, is it reliable, can I trust what God has told me, now we can start having a conversation with our Bibles that might change their lives. All right? So next week will be better, I promise. I promise. Let me go ahead and close with prayer.
If I found a prayer request, if you get time for it. 'Cause, I've been talking to a friend of mine at work about Jesus. He's let's say like a secular Muslim. He's just a great good guy. And so as we're talking about it, he's got like a 10-year-old kid. Well, his 10-year-old kid's friend is a pastor's child in the community. And they went for their 10th birthday, like to New York City. And the kid suffered a brain aneurysm and was in a hospital in New York City. So the young boy who's 10, who's suffering a brain aneurysm, his name is Riker Stipik. To pray for his healing, but then also to pray for his mother and father and their witness through this, and then to pray that Mazen, he's such a good man. Like he sees the problem of evil, and to see that God can work through this.
Mazen to come to great Jesus. And then also take care of the families that suffer through this.
Definitely. I don't remember all the names, but God knows all the names. Lord, as we have shared tears and insights and thoughts and pain, you've been here with us. And I'm so thankful to you. We trust you, Lord, even when we don't understand. With Liz and with Chris's friend. It just seems senseless, but we know that you have a sense of how these things are supposed to play out. And I pray that you soften the hearts of those that you need and want to soften so that we can see the miracle through the things that we don't understand. Like that beautiful glimpse that you gave me with Eden, where I got a chance to see a purpose in something that seemed meaningless. I pray for everyone here that they just trust you, Lord, because we know you are in charge. We know that you know what is best, and sometimes we just don't understand why that is. Help us to have peace and the assurance that it can only come from you, Lord. And I pray this in your name, Lord Jesus, amen. So did I make everybody cry today?
Yes.
Okay, good. Sorry. But it is the we need to spend time talking about these things. Amen. Because it's real and people are hurting. And we have the trust in God. What about the people that don't?